And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome aboard. I'm National Weather Service Meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service in Alaska region on this Monday, October 14th, 2024. And this is your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook. And the outlook starts with the state of the sea ice, and we do have some early ice development. We had some very strong northerly winds across the Chukchi Sea coastline through the Bering Strait and along the west side of the state. And over the course of the weekend on Sunday, some of the lowest water levels observed by the tidal gauges since they were installed in the late 80s and 90s occurred, not just like along places like Point Lay, but down here at Nome, the water level was almost 7 feet lower than the lower high tide level, and that's quite unusual. But when you have this big storm sitting down southeast of the Alaska Peninsula, south of Kodiak Island, there was just this large circulation of northeast to north winds across this region, and that tended to force the water level lower away from the shoreline. But we do still have some early ice development. Colder air is going to be settling in over this region, so we'll continue to see the ice develop here as we go deeper into the month and we start to trend more towards some colder temperatures. Looking at the Gulf here overnight, we still have that one low. It's finally weakened, coming up to 1,000 millibars right there just south of the central Gulf. But more importantly, here comes the next weather maker. A stronger cold front's going to push in to the areas along the northwest coast between Point Hope and Utqiagvik as we go through the day on Tuesday. This low south of the Aleutians will just stay generally along and south of the Aleutians, not especially potent compared to the past couple of systems in the past week and a half or so. But here comes a rather potent little low and cold front. That's going to bring accumulating snow and gusty winds that'll spread inland across the western Brooks Range and then eventually just working its way east-southeastward. So areas of the North Slope, Arctic coast, down along the Brooks Range, Dalton Highway there coming through Adigan and Atituvik passes will get some moderate to locally heavier accumulating snow with this system. And it's also going to push some lighter areas of snow and snow showers further southeastward with the colder air that will eventually make its way all the way down into the southeast mainland, Copper River Basin, Wrangell, St. Elias Mountains by Thursday, early Friday. This low that's located south of the Aleutians is not going to amount to too much. There's going to be another stronger low sending energy northeastward into the Gulf late in the week. So there could be another round of windy conditions along with moderate to heavier precipitation along the northeastern Gulf Coast into the Panhandle as we go through the end of this week into the upcoming weekend. But before then, we still have some lingering rain showers in areas of the Panhandle. It'll be the case on Tuesday, weak trough, just what's left of it. Southeast winds as high as 25 knots down here at Dixon Entrance, waves 4 or 5 feet. Look for winds more northerly, Lynn Canal with 3-foot waves. The outer coast, southeast to east winds right around 20, 25 knots. So there still could be some gusts down here in the south end off of Craig, up to 35 knots, and waves generally running 8 to 9 feet. Wednesday, a mixed bag of winds directions here in the inner channels. North winds 15 knots there at Lynn Canal. Stevens Passage, southeast winds to 15 knots, but northwest winds there at Dixon Entrance at 15 knots. Waves generally 2 to 3 feet. For the outer coast, we're going to see northwest north winds, 15 knots Cape Suckling outside of Yakutat Bay, but 25 knots west of Gustavus, Sitka, and off of Craig with 6-7 foot waves. Winds across the Gulf also have come down for Tuesday. East winds 10 knots within Prince William Sound, a couple of foot waves. Easterly winds 15 knots outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance. As we go down the length of Cook Inlet, northeast to north winds 10 knots, turning northwesterly 20 knots out of Kamishak Bay and the entrance of Cook Inlet with waves there 4 or 5 feet. And with some colder air pulling down out of the north, we have the low retreating further eastward along the Gulf North Pacific interface. Winds are going to be more north-northwesterly, 20 knots within Prince William Sound, 3-foot waves. Northeast to north winds, middle upper Cook Inlet at 15 knots. But we find here lower Cook Inlet at the entrance, west winds to 30 knots with waves 6 to 8 feet in that strait. And then looking at across Kodiak Island, northwest winds 15 to 20 knots on Tuesday. And generally north winds as we trail along the Alaska Peninsula, 15 to 20 knots, waves 2 to 4 feet on the North Pacific side, 3 to 5 feet on the Bering side. And winds come down further on Wednesday, at least over the Alaska Peninsula and in Bristol Bay in the central portions. Still look for southwest to west winds, 25 knots there within Shelikof Strait and east of Kodiak Island. And as we head on down toward Cold Bay, False Pass, winds turn easterly at 20 to 25 knots. For the Aleutians, winds will generally be out of the east, 25 to 30 knots, eastern central Aleutians before turning more northeast to northerly, especially west of Adak and Kiska. And then as we get into the day Wednesday, generally northeast winds 25 knots, eastern central Aleutians until you get west. From around Kiska westward, winds turn back more easterly at 15 knots with the highest waves upwards of 10, 12 feet there to the north and northeast of Atka. And for the southwest coast, these winds are finally come down. We're looking at north winds to 20 knots out of Bristol and Kuskokwim Bays. Northeast winds 15 knots around the Pribilofs with 3-4 foot waves. West winds into Norton Sound and along the lower Yukon Delta at 15 knots with 3 foot waves. For Wednesday, winds will continue northerly 10 to 15 knots out of Kuskokwim and Bristol Bays. Northeasterly to 20 knots around the Pribilofs with waves 4 to 5 feet. And then Norton Sound down along the lower Yukon coast to north of Nunavik Island. Northwest winds around 10 knots with 2 to 3 foot waves. Winds are going to be picking up through the Bering Strait and the Chukchi Sea in advance of the cold front that'll be pushing inland on Tuesday afternoon and evening. Ahead of the front, though, winds will be southerly, south-southwesterly, upwards of 25 knots with some higher gusts, especially there through the Chukchi Sea with waves of 5 to 6 feet and snow overspreading this area. Winds will be southerly Utqiagvik, southwest to west 20 to 25 knots from around Prudhoe Bay eastward to Kaktovik. And then in the wake of the frontal passage, because the front's going to push all the way down just south of the Seward Peninsula into the central interior, winds are going to go northwesterly. The strongest 25 knots here through the lower Chukchi Sea, especially Cape Lisburne, Point Hope, down through the Bering Strait with waves 6 to 8 feet. Further north, winds become more northerly, Utqiagvik to, say, Kuparik, Prudhoe Bay, 20 knots. And then westerly winds to 25 knots around Kaktovik. And there still will be lingering areas of mainly lighter snow, some blowing possible, and a little colder temperatures as that system makes inroads and pushes further southeast across the mainland on Wednesday.